tell the difference between a fiddle player and a dog?
I really don't know.
Well, the dog knows when to stop scratching.
Okay. Wait, I've got a better one. The ad said free fiddle, but there were strings attached.
Oh, come on. Well, there probably is many jokes about fiddling as there are fiddlers, but I think we should tell our fine audience here a few details about the instrument and its music, dating back to the arrival of immigrants from Europe.
Weren't there already instruments and styles of music in use on the continent before they arrived?
Yep, you're right. There were approximately 500 independent Indian nations here. They had their own music, culture, and language. They used frame drums, flutes, and rattles, and their songs were much like songs from Europe. They were about love, hunting, and other day-to-day activities. But most tribes also developed ceremonial songs used for sacred purposes and healing.
Now, what did the immigrants from England, Ireland, and Scotland contribute to the music of America way back in the 1700s?
Well, besides instruments like the bagpipes and the fiddle, Celtic culture, similar to Native American culture, also recognized how music can inspire and uplift and even heal. For instance, the Irish consciously developed 3 categories for their music. Tunes that could inspire the audience to laugh and even dance, tunes that would put them to sleep, and tunes that would move them to tears. And just as each Native American tribe had their own repertoire of songs, each region of England, Ireland, and Scotland developed its own repertoire. For instance, many Irish fiddlers know at least 5,000 tunes each, but with few in common, all learned by ear.
Wow, they must have really huge books filled with tunes.
Not at all. For centuries, they've learned by ear, from one generation to the next, and that still happens today. Most fiddlers I know have learned all their tunes by ear. But now we're going to play a tune that was written by an Irish musician named O'Carolan back in the late 1600s. And this is rather rare because we don't know who wrote thousands of these tunes. So this is wonderful that we at least know of one name that I can share. And this tune is called Shabag Shamor. It's a Gaelic title. And it's translated, it means small fairy mound, big fairy mound.
was a beautiful tune, but I see what you mean. The music made me feel melancholy. So is each tune played the same way by all fiddlers?
It's a great question, but since most of these tunes have been learned by ear, there are many different versions of each tune, often changing names. A person can't remember where they learned the tune or what it was called, so they give it another name. And it was up to each player to add the ornamentation that they liked, which is what I was doing as we repeated the melody.
So they can just suddenly add techniques like tremolo.
Well, tremolo is more of a classical technique.
Okay.
You don't hear a lot of that you don't hear any of it really in fiddling, but there are a few styles that use a teensy bit.
All right. What about big slides?
Well, big slide. You might hear that in Romany music. There's different, each style has their own thing, but the music we're playing tonight would be more like small slides. It just depends on the tradition.
All right. Oh, okay, I get it now, but I need to hear a tune that makes me want to dance.
Well, we just happen to have something that might make you want to dance.
Okay.
I'd like to see those dance steps. We're going to hear these wonderful elementary students play an Appalachian tune called Bile Them Cabbage Down.
All right.
Yeah, see, you wanted to dance, and that was Mason's apron. So we gave you two tunes to dance to. Was he dancing? I couldn't tell because I was busy playing.
Listen, if I danced like I wanted to, I would have fell right off this stage. Okay. I have always wondered about one thing.
Yes.
How can you tell the difference between a fiddle and a violin?
Well, the people we call fiddlers play the same instrument as those we call violinists. But after importing Irish and Scottish fiddle styles, American fiddlers were responsible for inventing at least 6 brand new American styles right here in this country.
Okay, so the difference between a violinist and a fiddler in the early days of America might be that the violinists played the same music they had been taught in Europe, and the fiddlers explored new sounds on their instruments.
You nailed it. That's exactly it. And so we can credit these very creative violinists, instead of playing the same music they'd been taught in Europe, with creating new sounds on their instruments in a new country for them.
Now, I still have to wonder, now that we established it, I'll ask it again, what is the difference between a violin and a fiddle?
Well, let's see.
Break it down for me.
I don't know. Unless you want to go to, with how some folks down south explain the difference.
All right, how do they explain it down there?
Well, you're going to have to ask me the question again.
All right. What's the difference between a violin and a fiddle?
One has strings, and the other has strangs.
I'm sorry I asked.
Me too. But seriously, many of the new styles of music invented across the centuries have either been created or inspired by fiddlers, particularly here in America.
Wow, I didn't know that. So what new American styles of music are we talking about here?
Well, you got your Appalachian, you got your blues, rhythm and blues, and then, the R&B eventually developed into rock and pop, and then you got the bluegrass, the Cajun, Franco-American, Western swing, and jazz, and,
Wow!
I'm a
lot.
doctor,
Oh,
Well, I better get my doctorate. That was very impressive.
that was amazing. But by the way, I knew about Cajun-style potato chips and Franco-American SpaghettiOs, but I didn't know they were fiddle styles too.
Oh, please. Moving right along. Let's check out the Appalachian fiddle style.
Where did that style come from?
Appalachia?
Oh.
Okay. So we've already heard some tunes that were transported to America by Irish immigrants hundreds of years ago, called Shabag Shamoor and Mason's Apron. Well, Scotch-Irish immigrants settled in the Appalachian Mountains way back when, and their fiddle style gradually developed into a new sound that folks called hillbilly fiddling, also known as old-time or old-timey. Now we mostly call this style Appalachian fiddling. So this next tune is pretty interesting because it includes some bluesy slides in it.
What? What's that?
Celtic tunes don't use much slide technique, and same goes for Appalachian fiddling, but enslaved African Americans were taught to play the violin because the plantation owners could rent them out to play at dances and balls and things like that, parties. So they learned American fiddle tunes, classical pieces from Europe, as well as popular melodies. They also invented the style we know today as the blues, which employs a number of different types of slides. So for many decades, they learned from the Appalachian fiddlers, and the Appalachian fiddlers learned from some of their techniques. And things like syncopation, fighting against the beat got incorporated into some fiddle tunes. Like there's a tune called Twin Sisters. You would never hear that otherwise in an Appalachian tune. That's a little bit of syncopation there. And then slide technique, which we're going to demonstrate when we play the tune Reuben.
Now, where did the structure for these tunes come from? They seem to be really short.
It's pretty interesting because fiddling all over the world seems to do this. Most styles, not every single one, but it's like 4 measures, A section, same measures repeated, B section, 4 and 4, sometimes 8 and 8, depending the tempo and all of that. But they put them together in a medley often, and then you got 3 tunes in a row, and so instead of the 30-second tune, you know, you get, at least you get a minute and a half out of it, right? So there's a really popular American fiddle tune called Sally Gooden that follows that form. It's been kicking around since at least the 1870s. And in 1922, a Texas fiddler named Eck Robertson.
Wait. Did you say his name was Eck?
Eck, yes, I did.
Okay.
Well, his real name was Alexander, but everyone called him Eck. Anyway, in 1922, he walked into a New York City recording studio and recorded 10 tunes for the Victor Talking Machine Company. Now, this is important because this was the day that commercial country music was born. The first hit record had no vocals on it, just solo fiddle. Scratchy by today's standards, but still great. Eck played his version of Sally Gooden and followed it with 12 variations, which was actually unusual at that time.
Wow. Are we going to hear all 12 variations?
Are you okay, everybody, with staying till midnight? Is that all right? Oh, no? Oh, okay. All right, well, no, we're just going to hear a few of them, I think.
All right.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, most of today's fiddlers still learn the tunes by ear. Some American players know hundreds of tunes, while others know thousands. All learned by ear and passed down through the generations. For some tunes, there are practically as many versions of each tune as there are fiddlers. For instance, Jolie Blanc is the Cajun national anthem, and they say there are as many versions of this tune as there are Cajuns.
where did the Cajuns come from?
When the English forced 5 generations of French settlers out of Nova Scotia in 1755, some families were able to sneak into New England, though New England didn't want them to come. But if they had boats, they could come in at night. While others were given land in Louisiana, because nobody wanted Louisiana, there was too much water. But the Cajuns figured out how to build houses on stilts. And their music absorbed new influences from African American, Native American, and Celtic. Hey, yeah.
I know an interesting story about a fiddler from Appalachia.
I would love to hear it. I've
Really?
been waiting.
Anybody else interested in hearing my fabulous story? All right.
Oh, good. Okay.
Thank you. Well, next to his dog, you know, Grandpa loved his mail order fiddle just about the best of anything in the world, and he never let his son Bill touch it. And when Grandpa left the farm to fight in the big war, Bill gets messing around with the fiddle, and sure enough, it gets smashed.
Shame on Bill.
Yeah. So Bill and his mother were terrified. They knew they'd be in a lot of trouble if Grandpa ever found out. So they took the busted fiddle down to the music shop in the city, and they found an exact match to Grandpa's mail order fiddle.
Good idea.
Yeah. And they tuned it up, got it all perfect, and they put it back to the farm. They put it back under the bed, and there it laid untouched until Grandpa returned. And when he got back, he patted his dog, and he made a beeline for his fiddle.
So much for his family, huh?
Yeah. Having a big smile on his face, because he's going to see his long-lost friend. He tucked it up under his chin, and he launched into a tune, and immediately the joy drained from his expression.
Oh.
Bill, you've been messing around with my fiddle. You messed it up. I can't play a darn thing on it. Turns out that many years ago, when Grandpa's mail order fiddle first arrived, it wasn't tuned to anything close to standard tuning, but not knowing anything about violins or music, Grandpa figured it was probably tuned the right way, and so he learned how to play it that way. He had a pretty good ear, so if it went out of tune, he just put it back where it went. Of course, now he couldn't play it at all because it was tuned in perfect standard tuning.
Just goes to show that there's many ways to play the same instrument, huh? That's very interesting. Thanks, Danny.
You're welcome.
Danny Weiss on guitar here. You know, that story about Grandpa reminds me of just how many fiddlers in America, and in Appalachia in particular, made their own instruments.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Are you saying not every fiddler, ordered their instrument from the catalog like Grandpa did?
That is what I'm saying. A lot of fiddlers made their instruments from the wood on their farms, with sheep intestines for strings and hair from their horses' tails for their bows.
Oh no! They killed their animals to make music?
No, they just cut some hair off the horse's tail. The horse was fine. And they attached it to a piece of wood to make the bow. But when they killed a sheep, they used every little bit of it. The meat for their meals, the fur for their clothes, the fat to make candles, and the gut for fiddle strings.
Oh, okay. So what happened to all those tunes from Appalachia?
Oh, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of fiddlers throughout the United States that keep this tradition alive. And a singer and mandolin player named Bill Monroe. Anybody know that name out there? Okay, well, this is your moment to find out who he was. He grew up immersed in the Appalachian music of Kentucky. He met a local blues artist named Arnold Schultz, who had a major influence on him. Monroe combined the best of both worlds, Appalachian and blues, to develop the style we now know as bluegrass. The music uses blues slide technique and something called a blue note. Nice demonstration, thank you. Monroe always maintained that the fiddle was the king of the bluegrass style. And just like in jazz, bluegrass instrumentalists improvise after they play the melody.
So what would it sound like to take an Appalachian tune and pump it up into the bluegrass style.
I'm so glad you asked. All right, everybody, let's play the tune Cripple Creek in the old-time style and then change that melody into the bluegrass style.
Alas, had it not been for my violin, I scarcely can conceive how I could have ended the long years of bondage.
Northam, a black violinist kidnapped up north and sold into slavery.
It introduced me to great houses, relieved me of many days' labor in the field, supplied me with conveniences for my cabin, with pipes and tobacco and extra pairs of shoes, and oftentimes led me away from the presence of a hard master to witness scenes of jollity and mirth.
Some old newspaper ads from the 1700s recapture the legacy of enslaved musicians who discovered that excellence on an instrument like the fiddle might provide them with a slightly gentler life as a slave, though not their freedom. I wrote the melody for this next tune, Mindy's Fiddle Blues, in the style of the historic 1920s blues fiddler, Nap Hayes.
Selena Ayez. Thank you, Miss Celine. Next is Miss Ryan on the harp. Next we have Miss Maddie. Miss Renee. Thank you, Renee. And now Miss Isla. Excellent. Let's hand it to Mr. Danny over here. What you got, Miss Julie?
I'm gonna take one more. After enslaved African American fiddlers invented the blues, this style became the root of every contemporary style we have in America. Before the blues existed, Appalachian fiddlers would basically play the melody for each tune over and over again with small variations. But the blues fiddlers were the first to improvise on the violin in America. And the blues eventually developed into rhythm and blues, rock and roll, swing, and jazz. So the art of soloing most likely inspired bluegrass musicians to improvise.
Now, what happened to all those blues fiddlers?
It's actually a pretty sad story, but they started in string bands. The percussionist would play the washboard, and the bass player had a big string on a stick that you know, boom, bing, boom, bing, and then the fiddler would play over them. She's very good at this. Multi-talented here. But when they migrated to the cities, they couldn't be heard in bars and places like that because there was no amplification for them back then. Like this particular violin has the amplification, the technology inside of it, so you see the wire coming out. And that's my electric violin, but none of that existed back then. So they found work playing for the silent films. And the silent films went 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So as long as you could keep making music, you were making money. And they did very well. They could buy large houses down a boulevard in Chicago, the beautiful big houses. And one day, the talking films came out and they were all put out of work, just like that. So Milt Hinton, very famous jazz bass player, when I was interviewing him for one of my NPR series, we were just kind of chatting. We were done with the interview, but the tape was still turning. Yes, it was tape back then. And he kind of shook his head. He said, you know, before I played the bass, I played the fiddle, except all the kids made fun of me, so I switched to the bass. But, you know, I was earning money delivering newspapers on my bicycle. And that was so sad when I get to that big boulevard in Chicago. And I'm like, well, why? Because all those blues fiddlers were sitting on their back porches. And I'm like, what? Because I've been trying to figure out what happened to them for years. It's like, what? All the blues fiddlers? He said, yeah, the only way they could hold on to their houses was to roll cigars for the uptown department stores. Very sad, yeah. But we do have some recordings on 78s that have now been, you know, refurbished and are available on iTunes and all that. So,
So I get it. So they played for the silent films because they had no other way to amplify the violins.
yep. And then finally, you know, there was more equipment invented. But if it weren't for this blues tradition, we would have lost so much in this country in terms of the music. And particularly, you know, as I said, bluegrass, but even boogie woogie came from the blues.
Wow. So Irish, Appalachian, blues, bluegrass. I'm overwhelmed with the number of styles. A bunch of hair wrangled out of a horse's tail, drawn on a cigar box with a sheep gut for strings and crank out. The early days of America. Have we missed anything?
Oh yeah. There's at least 30 bowed string styles worldwide. So we've barely scratched the surface. Scratched. Get it?
Ha ha ha.
All right, well, I was trying, you know. Apparently your sense of humor is better than mine. As the style we call swing emerged, violinists had difficulty at first because they couldn't be heard over the jazz bands. But a swing style emerged called Western swing as fiddlers headed west for the gold rush. So here's an example of an Irish tune named Lady's Fancy that as it moved west developed into a new style of music called Western swing, also known as Texas swing. And it was renamed Say Old Man, Can You Play the Fiddle? So we'll start with the Irish version, I should say the Irish version, before we play the Western swing version.
Listen. What's Simon? Miss Annabella making her way. All right, thank you.
A small handful of jazz violinists who played with the big bands in the 1930s. Eddie South, Joe Venuti, Ginger Smock.
Whoa, there's a female jazz violinist way back then?
Yeah, it took me decades to find one. Most people don't know about her because she didn't get much support to record or perform. All the men got that support, but later she did a lot of TV work and radio work. And as you've already learned, jazz violinists didn't have good amplification solutions for violin until the 1950s. So the violin obviously couldn't be heard over an entire horn section or drums. This happened to legendary jazz violinist Stuff Smith.
Wait, did you say his name was Stuff?
Well, his real name was Hezekiah Leroy Gordon Smith. I think Stuff sounds better, but everyone called him Stuff. Here's his wife, Arlene, describing to me what it was like for him when he tried to play with a very famous band.
Stuff was young. He ran away from home to join a band, and he belonged to the Alphonso Trent band for many years.
Stuff Smith's wife, Arlene Smith.
Well, then he and one of his friends in the band decided that they wanted to get into big time, so they went to New York to make big time. Well, the first thing they did was they got themselves green derbies, green suits, and they stood out in the corner. They thought they were going to knock New York on its ear. Of course, they would probably just look like the country hicks that they were. So he wanted to play in Jelly Roll Morton's band. And Jelly Roll said, well, he didn't think a violin would be heard, but he could come if he wanted to. So he hired Stuff on, and Stuff played violin in this band. Jelly Roll Morton's band was a loud band, and nobody could hear the violin, and Stuff would go home every night and cry, because nobody could hear him. And after a week, he gave up, and they went back to Alphonso Trent.
So despite his disappointment, Stuff Smith went on to become a very famous and well-respected jazz violinist.
Now, I've heard that other American jazz violinists they've earned big reputations too, like Eddie South and Joe Venuti.
You're right, and Venuti was also a great practical joker. You can hear him playing right now. Once he got tired of a saxophone player's constant foot tapping, so between songs he managed to nail the sax shoe to the floor. but I don't recommend that any of you try that if you don't like anybody in the orchestra tapping. So another time, Venuti hired well over 24 bass players for a make-believe gig and told each one to meet him at the corner of Broadway and 46th Street for the job in New York City. He watched from a window in a building across the street as each arrived dressed in a tuxedo, carrying his bass. Can you imagine? The Musicians Union made Venuti pay every single one of them their full salary, but Venuti said it was worth the laugh.
That's not funny.
I guess you had to be there.
So how would you describe the difference between classical violinists and jazz violinists? So far, I've learned that jazz violinists have names like Stuff and Joe instead of typical classical names like Jashka and Yasha and Yehudi and Midori and Itzhak but what could they do that a classical player couldn't do?
I'm glad you asked because we'll demonstrate a little bit here. So jazz players have to learn how to play in all 12 keys, which is what you just heard us do. And you need obviously solid right hand technique, left hand technique, and knowing the fingerboard every which way possible. And they have chords. So you have to learn how to memorize the chord changes, hear the melody in your inner ear while you're making up music on the spot, which you just heard some of our wonderful volunteers do in front of you for the very first time in their lives, and I'd like you to all give them a hand now. That was very, very brave of them. And it is very hard.
Could you give me a little bit more details on that? Give me a little bit more in-depth. Like, what do you mean?
Well, if I'm, let's say, do you know Loverman? I'm just going to fix my volume here because I'm having trouble hearing myself over there. Okay. Okay, so let's say, so D minor, G7, D minor, G7. So that's an example of knowing the chord changes under the melody, right? Now, once I get that, I'm hearing, you know, then I'm going to start to make up lines over that. So we haven't rehearsed this, so poor Danny is just coming along for the ride here. But let's say the next time around, I'm not going to play that. I'm going to do something different with it. Etc.
Yikes. This
You know,
one
Miss
sounds
Julie.
hard.
Yeah.
Miss Julie, we might have an example of a swing piece we could play.
Ah, strings do swing.
They do indeed. Let's show us that.
Okay. I'm going to switch instruments for this. So this instrument is called an NS Design, named after Ned Steinberger. And I don't know if you can see back there, but I've got all these stickers on it. You probably see the rows on the back, but I'll show you the front. So today we have many, these are called solid body electric violins. From all over the world, people have designed them. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, so what contemporary styles have we missed?
Well, think of the blues like the trunk of a tree. We already heard how it influenced bluegrass and how it evolved into swing music, which became jazz, as well as how the swing style migrated west to become a style called Western swing. But when blues traveled to the big cities and musicians added in a drum set, it became R&B.
Do you mean rhythm and blues?
Exactly. So you're catching on now. Yeah. And then R&B inspired the development of rock music, which branched off into more limbs of the tree than I can count.
Ho, ho, ho. Let's put the students to the test.
Aha, you didn't
Who
know we were
here
gonna
can
do
name
this.
different rock styles?
Okay.
You got your rockabilly, you got your heavy metal, grunge, punk rock, British indie, I think. There you go, British indie. We got our glam rock. Can you think of one? Soft rock. How about you, Kellen?
Hard rock.
Yes. Everybody loves Metallica, right? Don't you, Victor?
He doesn't.
Everybody loves rock and roll. Just admit it.
All right, all right. Well, are we going to hear an example of one of these rock styles?
We are. And I kind of need like 5 hands and 3 heads for this show. Give me a second here. I got this going on. Okay, so we're going to use a rock backing track here for everybody to play. And I'm just going to, whoops, sorry. Spaghetti back here. Take this off for a second, otherwise I'll get feedback.
Mr. Sereno, do you know what a dentist's favorite time is?
I don't know, Dr. DeSalvio, what?
2:30.
Oh!
2:30.
No.
Okay, so keep in mind that there's very few rock orchestras in the world for both strings because each one of us would have to have our own amplification and we drown each other out. So it's very, very difficult to balance instruments, which is why our fine players have been using a mic to play. We tried with an electric violin, but it was a little bit too hard to adjust to.
Now, what do you mean by an amplified instrument?
Well, that's what you've been hearing here. You can add a pickup to a bridge or to the body of the instrument or bury it inside or build technology so teensy that I can have a nice lightweight instrument here. And many different choices now, but this one's called a solid body.
And you can, like, add special effects to it, right?
Yeah, I can. Like you heard me playing with wah-wah a little bit earlier.
Far out. So you could also add like a phase shifter, or there's also distortion. Oh. And maybe digital delay.
Oh boy, you're really challenging me.
Very cool. Now, I heard one of your favorites is the harmonizer.
Yeah, I almost forgot about that. Thank you for pointing that out to me. All right, so a harmonizer, when you play a note on your instrument, it's going to, you can tune it different ways. I like to have an octave below.
All
nice?
If you can't amplify an entire string orchestra, how can they play any style of rock music?
Well, we have to kind of, fudge it tonight in terms of, not having a whole orchestra of solid bodies, but we are going to have some solos using the mic. And we've got a nice track here to help support what we do. So this tune is called Rockin' the Rock. And I'm going to get this track going.
Collins.
both of us.
All right, so what are we going to hear next? Well, that's some awesome rock. But no, what are we going to hear next? I feel like we've heard every style under the sun, yet there's still more.
Well, this is going to be the final piece of our program, but first I want to thank David Hercock for working with me over this past year to make this happen. He's put an enormous amount of time into this. And to Pagan DeSalvia, Dr. Pagan DeSalvia, who has been amazing to work with. And Dan Serino, who is made for this part. And Danny Weiss on guitar. So this is a piece that was not created for bowed strings, but I met this woman in my travels named Valerie Naraha. At the time, she had been playing in the Saturday Night Live band and on a Broadway show as well, somehow both at the same time. I don't know, she's a very busy woman. But she kept saving her money. She was a marimba player because she wanted to study with the top Gili player in the world. So the Gili is from Ghana, and it is like a marimba, but it's shaped like this with little wooden panels. And the player sits on a seat low to the ground and uses mallets to play it. So she saved up for years to go to Ghana, and she hired a guide, and they drove forever until there was no roads, and they walked and walked and walked, because she's carrying her travel marimba, which is pretty heavy. And she gets to this famous Gili player, and the guide translates to him, a famous American marimba player who's come to study with you. And the man says, no, women aren't allowed to play the Gili. And she said, well, I've traveled such a long distance, and I've hired substitutes for my jobs in New York City. It's been very expensive to get here. Would you at least let me play the marimba for you since I carried it here? So he agreed. As soon as he heard her, he changed the law in Ghana to allow women to play, and then she was able to study with him. Isn't that a wild story? So she showed me this piece that he had taught her that has 7 parts to it. And the thing that really stands out to me, just waiting for the conversations down there to stop. Okay, so too busy talking to hear me. This piece is played by the villagers in the evening if something has been stolen. And the piece of music tells that person to please be a good member of the community and return the object. And it always shows up in the middle of the night, or I assume most of the time it does, because they don't watch. They let that person, just do it on their own. And it shows enormous trust between the villagers and such a different way of handling theft. Isn't that an amazing story? So I was in Newtown during the Sandy Hook shooting, and I spent a year, I canceled all my work. I spent a year organizing memorial concerts across the United States. And we in Newtown took a pledge to try in any way we could to create community, neighborliness, respect for one another. And that's why I really love this piece, because I feel that that represents all of that. So we're going to have, I'm doing something different with this. It's called Pen Logo. So instead of just playing the 7 parts, because we don't have 7 Gillies here, I have invited some new budding composer conductors to create their own music on the spot using the 7 parts in this piece, Pen Logo.
Hello. Hi. My name is Stella Driscoll, and for those who don't know me, I am a senior here at St. Vincent High School. And we have a tradition here at the string concert to give a senior speech just to reflect our experience through the last 10 years of our lives in this program. But first, I would like to give a round of applause to my dear fellow senior, James Paradise. He is a wonderful musician. He started playing the bass literally last year, but he's been playing percussion for, I don't even know. You're a great musician, so you deserve the recognition. And my other dear friend, who's been with me since day one, Cry Yelson. Cry. He was one of my first stand partners when we first started, and he is one of the greatest people I've ever met. So thank you two guys. And of course, the woman that we could not have done this without, the lovely Mrs. Dr. DeSalvio. She is a rock star. If any of you guys have ever met her, she is a rock star, a superhero, and we absolutely love her. She picked up this concert 2 weeks ago and made it her own, and this is a reflection of her work, not just ours. So thank you, Dr. DeSalvio. And if you have tuned me out, please tune me back in, because this guy deserves the most ears in the room. This is Mr. David Hercock. This is a little long, so please bear with me, because I love this man so much that I have written a lot. So this concert is supposed to take us on a journey through American music, but it also represents a journey through the last 10 years of our lives. The journey that was filled with many highs, many lows, many emotions, obviously, and many experiences. Many laughs, but also a few tears, and of course, a lot of music. Who knows why the three of us are still here, or why Cry and I stuck it out through this whole time. Maybe it was because we love to play music, maybe it was because the people we met and befriended along the way, or maybe it was a little bit of both. No matter what our reasons are deep down, one thing is for certain: this strings program has given us so much. Mr. Hercock's class has meant the world to me since I was in 3rd grade. I always looked forward to his class, not because I was planning on being the next Mozart, but because I was excited to play with some music with some of the great people. Mr. H is more than a teacher. He is an ear to rant to, a person to seek advice from, and most importantly, our friendly mentor that we look up to. This might be the end of our orchestral journey, or maybe just an ending leading to a new beginning, but who knows? Our instruments might collect dust on our shelves until one day we decide to pick it up, right back up, and take in all the memories as they come flooding back. To future generation string kids, stick with it. This program has given us so many memories, both good and maybe not so good, that we will carry the rest of us, that we will carry with us well past we leave these faithful St. Vincent High School halls. memories that we will look fondly upon when we move past this part of our lives. I know Mr. H can be a little scary. He's a little scary, guys. But he really isn't. Mr. H is our own grumpy British grandpa who may raise his voice at times, but shows his students a whole lot of love. That's not something you see every day. Mr. Hercock is one of the few people that we think truly listened to what we had to say, whether it was some dumb joke or a political or social debate that lasted most of the period. There were times that the world seemed a little bigger than the rehearsing our pieces, and that we would put our music aside for 20 minutes and just chat about what problems we or society as a whole were facing. He cared about our opinions and helped us express our views just by being someone who truly listened. Sometimes this class was more than just an art requirement. However, don't forget to practice. Don't forget to practice, guys. Because Mr. Hercock expects the best, but only because he deserves it, because he is the best. And with that, I just want to say one more thing that I tell Mr. H sometimes. One day, one of us will change the world, and I hope to keep that promise to you, Mr. H, and make you proud. Thank you. Love you, Mr. H. And with that, here comes our final piece and logo.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight for our concert. I want to thank Miss Julie Lion Lieberman, I just tried to combine it, Mr. Danny Weiss, Mr. Hercock for putting together all of this stuff over the past year. Thank you, Mr. Serino, for joining us up here and killing it, might I add. Isn't he funny? Give him a round of applause. Can we also have a huge round of applause for those of us who are brave enough to come up and solo? Please stand up and get recognized. Come on now. Come on. All right. Good job. All right. I also want to thank the orchestra boosters, without which none of this would have been remotely possible, especially Mrs. Malinowski, Mrs. Segrist, Mrs. Simone, and Mrs. Collar. Your fundraising efforts made all of this possible for this wonderful experience. Behind the scenes, I've had so many other teachers helping me. Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Serino, Mrs. Sigmund, Mr. Bacon, my husband, the other Dr. D, who's the band director here. All right, and the technology department, thank you guys so much for everything you do, from the lights to the sound to the live stream. Hi, everybody at home. Thank you guys all so much, and especially thank all of you, because without a supportive family and supportive friends and community around us, none of us, including myself, Miss Julie, Mr. Danny, Mr. Hercock, none of us would be able to make music together. So thank you guys so much for everything you have done for our babies to be up here making music. With that, we can go home. Alrighty, everybody's gonna go back to the places they needed to report to. Make sure we sign out our little Rush babies so we make sure they're going home with the right people, okay?